The WWF was firmly within the Attitude Era in the late 90s. Stone Cold Steve Austin was the main event, MTV was changing the media landscape, and The Simpsons was on season 11. Today, we are going to be looking back at the history and the impact of the very first WWF SmackDown game for the PlayStation 1. Our tale begins with THQ, who had worked with the Aki Corp to bring us the fantastic N64 games. There isn't much written about this, so I'm going to try my best to summarize this information. In 1996, Aki had released a game called Virtual Pro Wrestling. Yes, I named my channel very badly. And that was released exclusively in Japan. WCW wanted to get into the gaming business, so a deal was struck with THQ to bring Virtual Pro Wrestling to the West under the WCW banner, and thus WCW NWO vs. the World was born. Around the same time, the Simple series is a line of budget games published by a company called D3 Publisher Inc., and the goal is to create, as the name would suggest, a simple line of focused games on a specific topic. In this case, Yuke's would create The Pro Wrestling in 1999, which would end up being the foundation of what SmackDown would then become. Although digging into the game files, there are debug lines of code that reference WWF superstars, and if you look into the crowd, there are very obvious WWF logos on the t-shirts. Interestingly, The Pro Wrestling features a limb damage indicator, which is not something that the mainline WWE games would adapt for another couple of years until the PS2 generation. Since THQ had worked with WCW as they previously released WCW NWO vs. the World and WCW NWO Revenge, WCW had instead opted to continue their gaming business with Electronic Arts instead of THQ, meaning that WWF were able to strike up a deal with THQ and begin adapting Yuke's and Aki's work to the WWF properties. As a result, Aki would take their tremendous work on the N64 WCW games and adapt them to a WWF environment by creating WWF WrestleMania 2000. And Yuke's had worked on The Pro Wrestling, and were now able to begin work on what would become WWF SmackDown. In real life, WWF in late 1999 was smoking hot, beating all the competition in the ratings every single week, drawing in millions of dollars on monthly pay-per-view, and generally being one of cable's hottest TV shows. Fans would dub this time the Attitude Era due to the edgy and controversial nature of some of the storylines on TV at that time. But the Attitude Era is also well renowned for having one of the best rosters of all time, and that is represented in-game. You have several main eventers like The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, and The Rock. But there's also a decent selection of mid-card and women talent within the game, such as Ken Shamrock, Big Show, Ivory, and Chyna. Even some complete newcomers to the WWF like Chris Jericho, Edge, and Jeff Hardy even made the cut. Believe it or not, SmackDown at the time was controversial for simplifying the controls of a typical wrestling game. If we were to compare the game to what Aki were doing on the N64, there are considerable cutbacks in regards to what can be done within a typical match, and how the average match flows from bell to bell. Even comparing the game to previous Acclaim entries such as Warzone and Attitude, I would personally argue that the changes are very welcome. Aki and Acclaim had developed robust control systems for their games that trigger different attacks and animations based on character states and locations. For example, in WWF Attitude, you have access to different attack combos based on the current momentum of your character. Unfortunately, many of the button combinations change per character and can be very confusing to a new player. As a result, the player will end up pausing the game constantly to review what moves are available. Admittedly, as frustrating as the system can be, once you get used to the move list for a certain character, the match flow dramatically speeds up, and Attitude becomes somewhat of a better game. One thing that Attitude did have over SmackDown was commentary. WWF SmackDown has no play-by-play commentary at all, and instead opts to play ambient music over matches instead. Fun fact, when Sony were developing the PlayStation controller, each icon on the face buttons represents an action that could be taken within a game. For example, square indicates a map or inventory button, triangle is like visibility or camera control. Circle and cross are the Japanese standards for accepting and refuse. Yuke's would take a somewhat similar approach when developing the controls for SmackDown. This game predates the DualShock controller, so there are no thumbsticks here. Although modern advancements in emulation means that you can very easily map an analog controller to the game if you would prefer, the game does use the directional pads as movement. But playing the game on original hardware, let's break down some of the controls. Moving the D-pad in the selected direction will move your character that way. Pressing the cross will do an attack. Holding a direction will give you 4 different attack animations. Circle is your grapple button. Again, holding any direction will change the move that you do. Triangle will make your character run, and again, with a direction held, your character will run in that direction. Pressing only the circle button will initiate a Irish whip attack, where you can throw the opponent in any selected direction. And square is your dedicated reversal button, and if pressed at the right time will either block an attack or reverse a move, giving you an opening to put the pressure on player 2. If the opponent is in a stunned or groggy animation, then all of your grapples will trigger even new animations, and should you have a finisher stored, then L1 will trigger the finisher for your character. This is actually the first WWF game that allows you to store up to 5 finishers to be used at any time. Now, most matches will be completed within 5 minutes, as the character speed is significantly increased and selling is virtually non-existent as opposed to some of the Aki games. As a result, matches feel snappy and fresh at all time, so you never feel like you're waiting too long for your next match. And you also never feel like your previous matches were so long that you didn't want another match. It's almost like the TikTokification of wrestling games, but this was back in 1999 before TikTok was even a thing. Let's dive into the game modes. There is a really good selection of match types on offer here, especially for their first outing, as there are matches here that aren't even in the game series now. You have simple matches like singles and tags, but the real fun is in like cage matches where they now have ropes, where Attitude didn't have ropes. Backstage areas have been implemented into the core gameplay, so matches like Hardcore and Falls Count Anywhere, I Quit matches can be decided in various areas like the kitchen, the boiler room, or even the parking lot. If you were like me playing the game with an older sibling, then matches like Special Referee, King of the Ring, or Royal Rumble are great multi-person matches that ramp the chaos up to 11, and they are great fun when playing against or with your sibling or child. Much like the previous Acclaim games, you are able to create your own superstar. Unlike the Acclaim games, the creation suite here certainly could offer more. But it is technically the first effort from you, so it is hard to criticize too much. Essentially, you can create a custom character by selecting predetermined body parts to create a Frankenstein monster of a wrestler. And considering the lack of unique items that aren't already character or body parts from the base roster, there really isn't much you can create here. But it's not all bad news. You can give your character a personality that will change how they react in season mode and how the AI controls this character in matches where you aren't. You can also fully customize their moveset and assign them any move in the game, assuming that you have unlocked all the moves, characters, and creation parts from season mode. This game contains a season mode that is ironically more like universe mode than an actual season mode. Online forums seem to say that season mode is either 10 or 20 years worth of content, which is kind of insane, but you and up to 4 players can select anyone on the roster and go through a full calendar of WWF events with randomly generated storylines and match cards. Through the mode, you'll be completing storylines, climbing rankings, competing for various championship titles throughout your career, and there's a really good range of titles available here as every WWF title at the time has been implemented into the game. You can also change your character at any point if you want a change of pace. If you want to play as a created character, you will need to complete the pre-season mode to increase their stats before you take them into the main season. Thankfully, the pre-season is only 1 year and each month consists of 1 house show per month until you reach Raw or SmackDown, and then it's 1 show and a pay-per-view. Each match will give you stat boosts to improve your character after each match. Alongside the stat boost, you will also unlock something for either reaching a certain stage of the story or completing a certain amount of pre-seasons. Thankfully, if you do complete 10 years of pre-season, then you will be able to skip it for future created characters. A randomly generated season mode doesn't tickle your fancy? Well, you can create your own pay-per-view in the Create a Pay-per-view mode, where you can use any character in any match type in the game to create the show of your dreams. Once you have determined the card, you can skip, watch, or play the matches to your heart's desire, and at the end you'll be given an audience score based on how good the show was overall. This will then go onto a local leaderboard. Of course, this was well before internet-enabled consoles. and you can see what shows have performed better than others. In a way, this is almost like a really early version of GM mode, and it was really fantastic for me and my brother when I was younger and I wanted to create my own shows. We've discussed how the game plays, but generally, how does it look and feel? A big part of the WWE now, and an increasingly bigger part of the WWF in the late 90s, were how wrestlers were presented on TV. This is in thanks in part to the tremendous entrances and special stage layouts for their monthly pay-per-views. Entrances in WWF Attitude looked stiff, and although they were fairly well motion captured, it's hard to say that they were fully authentic. With WWF SmackDown, much like the controls, they actually simplified this part of the presentation too, where the game just shows the character's entrance video, at that point they were called Titantron videos, with a short animation of their entrance almost green screened in front of the video. It's very quaint, and I really appreciate what they were trying to do with the technical limitations of the PS1. In saying this, it's funny that the entrances are simplified in this way when the victory scenes do take place within the ring. I would have to imagine that they couldn't technically figure out a way to have the character go from the stage down to the ring, as in like Falls Count Anywhere matches or hardcore matches, they are two separate maps that need a loading screen in between them. Again, I fully understand what they were trying to achieve, and I am really glad that we did eventually get full 3D entrances later in the series. Since this is also a fully 3D game, there are options for camera cuts, and when this is enabled, the game camera will dynamically swing and move around with the action happening in the ring. Hit a DDT and the camera will zoom right into your character as you grab them and cut to a wide angle as you bring them down. Nothing highlights this more than hitting your finisher on an opponent, and every finishing move is made even more exciting with this hyperactive camera movements and the crowd reaching their massive crescendo. Audio was actually great for the most part. There are massive ring crashes when the moves are performed and you hear thuds as the characters hit each other with hulking strikes. The crowd will also respond appropriately, cheering for moves that happen in the game. They count down with the entrance timer in the Royal Rumble. As mentioned, there is no play-by-play commentary, there is also no crowd chanting for specific superstars, so to break up the endless crowd noise is a banger soundtrack of electronic and rock adjacent music. It's maybe not to everyone's taste, but nothing gets me hyped more than these match soundtracks, which is why you will hear many of them in the background of most of my videos. Within Season Mode and Exhibition, you will come across several pay-per-view arenas such as WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series. The game separates all the arenas into two distinct segments, the entrance arena and the ring design. There are only really 3 entrance arenas to choose from, which is Raw, SmackDown, and a pay-per-view arena, but it's definitely more like a Japanese-style arena with an entrance and an exit on either side. The ring designs are also very varied, with a colourful array of ring mats and apron designs which didn't really appear in real life, but in the video game does provide a fantastic way to visually change the way that these events feel. WWF SmackDown for the PS1 is technically Yuke's first outing on the console. Although they had already developed The Pro Wrestling and integrated many of those systems in a way that satisfied WWE fans at the time, this game is foundational for all of the WWE games that came after, even to today. Even with the current WWE 2K games being on consoles that are so far removed from the PS1, they still run on the Yuke's engine, and I would bet that there are probably some variables or lines of code that are even still in the game now. SmackDown would release in March of 2000, but Yuke's and THQ were not done there. The deal between THQ and WWF was a 10-year deal with the intention of releasing at least 2 titles per year. This doesn't mean that they were going to flood the market with wrestling games, but just later that year, both SmackDown 2 Know Your Role and WWF No Mercy would release in November of 2000. In this regard, it almost makes SmackDown 1 like a beta test, or some kind of pre-release for what SmackDown 2 would then become. I'll get more into SmackDown 2 when that video drops, but it really is just like the first game, but more. Which is kind of insane to think that there's only really like an 8-month gap between those 2 releases. Although WWF had decided to move to Yuke's for the development of their mainline gaming series on the PS1, Acclaim would actually take their wrestling engine developed for Warzone and Attitude to the 3rd biggest brand in the late 90s, signing a deal to release 2 ECW games, which perhaps we should also look into in the future. In conclusion, WWF SmackDown is a phenomenal entry into the mainline series even today. The gameplay is timeless, as the simplified controls and easily understandable presentation keeps the game feeling fresh no matter how many matches you play in a session. Considering the game was released in the peak of the WWF's popularity in the early 2000s, the game still feels relevant, as although there are not many characters on the roster still wrestling today, the sheer magnitude of the talent in the game that paved the way for the talents of today means that going back to create fantasy match cards, playing historical main events, or even just seeing the beginnings of the WWE 2K series is an enjoyable experience no matter what you decide to do. It's hard to find reviews for this game considering the early days of the internet, but critics generally praise the infinite replayability of Season Mode, how fun the fast gameplay is from bell to bell, and generally favourable graphics at the time. Although fans were pitting this game, albeit unfairly, against WrestleMania 2000, it's clear that Yuke's were onto a hit. And that's going to be our review for WWF SmackDown 1 on the PlayStation 1. What a time to be alive. WWF was on top of the world, WCW was still trying their goddamn best, and arguably ECW was changing the media world. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider feeding the algorithm with a like, and if you want to see more reviews like this, then please consider subscribing. Have you ever played SmackDown 1? I realise now the game might be a little bit older than some of my viewers, but as terrifying as that is, I really hope that if you are one of those people, you can experience a part of the Attitude Era just as I did back in the 2000s. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please have a great day, and bye for now.